YouTuber EDP445 has been under fire now for some time, with most of the internet hopping on the hate train regarding his recent scandal. It first started with the internet allegations regarding him supposedly engaging with a minor inappropriately via text message. This is what prompted the predator poachers to set him up recently by posing as a minor and luring him to a parking lot where he was essentially caught in 4K. This catch has resulted in EDP losing large amounts of his fanbase, his YouTube being taken away, and the internet being pretty much unanimously against him. With the exception of one person. Me. My name is Artorious Mumbark, I studied law and criminal defense in Afghanistan, and today I will be giving the EDP defense case. I am going to focus on three main things: mental illness, exploitation, manipulation, and the actual character of EDP, to prove that he is innocent in this case. For my first point, I'm going to be talking about manipulation. Now keep in mind that I am speaking from the perspective that you are already aware of the facts and know about the EDP case. Now, going into manipulation, we need to understand the difference between two things: messaging an adult and messaging a minor. I know people will say it doesn't matter that the decoy was an adult because EDP thought he was messaging a 13-year-old. In this case, it actually does matter. If we look at two things: brain development and maturity. An adult is always going to respond differently than a kid would to messages and any other form of communication, and we know this. In this case, the decoy was an adult. The adult is going to be more aware of how to talk in a way that will arouse and get another person to engage in adult activities. A kid is considered too innocent to be aware of this. So, utilizing the adult and fully developed brain and mind of the decoy, the predator poacher team was successful in getting EDP to send sexual messages. Early messages show the decoy initiating the conversation as a fan, not potential sex partner. So far, EDP has no reason to care about the decoy's age. So now that we know the decoy wasn't an actual minor, it follows that we don't know how EDP would respond to an actual minor with a more innocent, non-adult mind. And we can see that the decoy had a mature mind and was successful in seducing EDP to send graphic images. They started the conversation, and the decoy was originally posing as a fan in order to warm up to EDP to seduce him, which is in essence manipulation. Before I am completely off the topic of manipulation, I'm going to go over a potential counterargument before I get into my next point about mental illness exploitation. So, people like to say that EDP shouldn't have engaged with a minor at all because he should have known better based off of his age. In this case, it is not good to bring up his age. They bring up his age to say that he should have known better and could have potentially took advantage of a teen. By this logic, in this case, it is actually the other way around. We saw earlier that the person engaging with EDP had a fully functioning adult mind and started the conversation and posed as a fan. EDP could not take advantage of someone with a mature adult mind who started the conversation and warmed up to him as a fan with the goal of getting him to get sexual with a minor. Now, as I said before, adults are going to be more aware of how to communicate in a way that would arouse and create a romantic tension with other adults. A kid would not. And we don't know how EDP would respond to someone with an actual innocent mind. Therefore, EDP was manipulator. Now that brings me to my second point: mental illness exploitation. People understand that one of the reasons it's generally wrong for adults to establish a relationship between kids is because the child has far less power and can be groomed into a relationship that is ultimately harmful for their psyche, that they may regret later due to a loss in innocence. They can bring on a variety of mental health issues. Now, as most people agree with that, you should also agree that people should be careful not to groom and take advantage of other groups who have less power and aren't dealing with a healthy mental state to the same degree as other people do. For example, you have people who date Down syndrome people. They understand that they carry a whole new set of responsibilities compared to the average person, and they understand this and they recognize that they have more power in an able and mental sense. Now let's acknowledge EDP's mental state versus the decoy. The purpose of setting him up was to prove that a particular grown man, EDP in this case, is a danger to children because he was thought to like kids. Now if you agree it's wrong to take advantage of someone who has an unhealthy mental state relative to the person they're talking to, you should consider the EDP's mental state. After the famous EDP catch, Chet Goldstein did an interview with EDP's ex. She said at the time he was going through a form of depression, and EDP lived a lonely life, didn't really have a lot of friends, and his family didn't engage with him much. Now the information that is important to know from that is that EDP was going through mental health issues of his own, including depression. He was lonely, and his ability to socialize was not as good as others, which is the reason a lot of people go untreated, because it has to do with not getting a motivation to help you through your issues that no one cares about. Now if you look at the decoy's mental state, not as bad as EDP's. And keep in mind that the decoy had a specific agenda, which was to set up EDP. They started the conversation posing as a fan in order to get closer to EDP in a psychological sense. This is manipulation, by exploiting off of someone's power, in this case EDP's clout, pretending to be a potential friend of someone battling severe symptoms of loneliness and the feeling of isolation, and using their fully developed brains to solicit graphic images from someone we now know isn't dealing with a healthy mental state or a full deck of cards. It is even worse when you consider that multiple people were engaging in the text messages to EDP during the process of manipulating him into getting graphic, which is in essence multiple grown men exploiting off of one person who is unable to think rationally. Therefore, EDP was groomed into sending explicit messages over a long period of being manipulated by multiple adults, with his mental state being exploited off of in order to set him up, which makes EDP the victim of sexual harassment in this case. This follows because you would make this case for anyone not dealing with a healthy mental state or dealing with proper brain development issues, who was manipulated into sending sexual messages over a long period of grooming. Now just for a moment I would like to make a potential counter-argument against the maturity difference argument people like to make. To do this I'm going to be utilizing the maturity information we talked about earlier. So, we know people have a problem with EDP messaging children because he's much older. But this doesn't hold up when you consider the decoy had an adult mind, and they were technically functioning better in terms of their mental state. Essentially, age isn't the only standard whereby we measure maturity and people's ability to make good decisions. Sometimes this can even be a bad approach. For instance, a teenager who is functioning completely normally is probably going to be more mature and have better judgment and reason than a 4-year-old with a brain damage or a brain developmental problem. Now, if we acknowledge this as true, then it becomes clear that it was actually the decoy who took advantage of EDP's maturity and his ability to make decisions. Therefore, the age argument against EDP goes out the window in favor of EDP. Now that I've explained how EDP was manipulated and his mental state was taken advantage of with the intention of getting him to send graphic messages, I will end with talking about EDP's real character. When trying to determine if someone would act in a way that you think they would based off of some internet content you saw that you thought was proof, I think it's best that we focus on how they were as a person separate from their allegations. To begin with, since we don't know much about how EDP acts in reality, we should defer to people who actually knew him. During the interview between EDP's girlfriend and the Predator Portraits, she is asked if his content versus his real character is different or the same. She says nothing but really positive things about EDP's character in real life. She says, "He wasn't like that with me in person at all. He treated me well." Then she goes on to say, "If he cared about you, he would do anything for you." This is proof that he is a separate person disconnected from his dark humor, and further disproves the idea that EDP would commit these crimes if he was dealing with a healthy mental state. To further corroborate this point, let's look at another comment she made. When asked if she thinks he was there mentally, all there or not, she says, "There's some kind of developmental delay." Now, with that information, it is important because now we know we need to treat EDP differently than you would treat a person operating under better conditions. The issue logic follows because, look, for example, a lot of people are against stealing, but we tend to acknowledge that there is a clear acceptable difference between a poor person stealing bread to eat versus a rich person stealing. The predator poachers even now said the EDP blocked the decoy several times, which is further indication that EDP is constantly trying to make good decisions to treat people good, but his poor mental state sometimes defeats him and is used against him by people like the decoy who is messaging him. Now that is the end of the character argument and just about wraps up the EDP defense case.